Hey guys, it's City Kapatilla, and today I want to talk about leadership roles. Roles like directing, being a supervisor, or just being a leader for this project. Now, I've been in this industry for about 12 years now, and I don't think I've ever had a supervision role for a major production. But I managed to land a supervision role for a much smaller project. And the thing about like a supervision, directing, or supervision role, you learn a lot and you grow a lot from doing it. One of the things I do appreciate being in that role is I do have a say in things. Like, people just don't brush me off. My opinions and thoughts do matter for the project. People were more willing to listen what I had to say as I offer certain solutions. And to be able to have a supervision role under my resume or under my portfolio will look good for future work. And people are more willing to hear my voice or to trust me for future work. There's a good amount of people in the animation industry that do want to be directors. They want to be leaders because they also want to show their directing and creative skills as a director or as a supervisor that does have a little bit more power. But there are also a lot of like crappy sides to being a leader, and I do want to talk about that. The first one I want to talk about is this burden of having to know things and having to withhold certain information. And I think this was a very painful part of being a supervisor or a leader. And now I kind of understand past directors and past supervisors' point of view. So an example is there was a case where I was told they were going to let go certain members of a production, or they were going to lay off certain staff, or they were going to make some big changes behind the scenes that will affect production. And I was told to sort of withhold that information because certain legality stuff wasn't really figured out. Other details were still being confirmed. And when it comes to working with artists under you, you don't want to compromise their overall performance when we need to perform while we still had their time. While I do believe in transparency, I can also understand why it's not my responsibility or it's not my job to share that information. Just because I don't want to speak for that, I can get information mixed up and cause further confusion. The best case scenario is you have someone break down that news. For example, a producer or someone in production or artist or human management. The worst case scenario is when you have to be the one to tell them that, because you become the bringer or the face of this heavy news. When a certain team was laid off from a certain production that we were working on, I had to send an email out saying, look, I just want to thank you guys for your hard work. I know this wasn't the best fit, but I also want to let you know that I appreciate the work that you put into it, even if it's not what the clients were looking for. Because I generally felt that way, and I also remember being in the spot of being that person being let go, but at the same time, you feel a part of responsibility for that. There's parts of you that felt like you could have done your part to avoid that from happening. So now I totally understand it when supervisors and directors say ignorance is bliss. Because even carrying that knowledge and having to keep it to yourself also affects my motivation and sort of my performance for the production. And this leads to another issue, which is having to make the choice of letting go someone. Now, we have to distinguish between the act of being fired and the act of being let go. When you're fired, it's usually for a really bad reason. And oftentimes, it's due to a violation. When you're letting go of someone, it's because of a business issue, or it's because they're not hitting a criteria or standard that we're looking for. Now, it really does suck when you have to let go of someone that leads to their termination of employment. But some of the reasons are legit, like the budget isn't there, they're not hitting the standard, or they're underperforming, or if it's an overall business decision. Now, I remember I had to let go of one animator because they were turning in work that wasn't up to standard, so I would have to spend more time redoing their work. And when I told them what they needed to work on, I could see that they were really struggling and not really used to this sort of workflow that we were working with. Now, if we continue down the line, it could cause more problems down the future. Now, as a leader, you have to make the choice of either keeping this person that might cause problems down the line, and eventually they might not be happy, or let go of this person and find someone that's more fitted for the role. So it's one of those choices that you have to tread carefully too. I think the next big one I do want to talk about is it's mostly a management and delegative role more so than it is creative. Like having to be the one to assign certain assignments or certain tasks to people, arranging schedules and figure out deadlines for certain artists, and having to trust someone else do the creative work, whereas you're busy dealing with, let's say, the management and sort of the delegative stuff. And that's not to say directors and supervisors can't be creative at all, it's just the time being squeezed, where you can only do so much. And when I jump back into a position where I have to work under a supervisor or director, like moving from an episodic director towards just a storyboard artist for someone else, I actually have way more time to use my creative skills for the work and not having to worry about the larger scope of things. But again, it depends on the production. Some productions prefer the directors have more creative control, or in other productions, you're trusting others to do the creative roles. And of course, there are some productions that are a mix of both. The next one I want to talk about is your time is needed extensively. So as a supervision role, you can be put into a lot of different meetings. Meeting with the art director, meeting with certain artists, meeting with the producers and the clients, and just trying to figure things out. I'm an introvert, so engaging with all of this in a short amount of time is very tiring, but it is definitely needed. And sometimes I'll have crucial meetings way past work hours, because sometimes those are the only times where you can have crucial meetings. In union work or work in Los Angeles, the directors can be given, let's say, 50 hours of work per week, which is 10 more hours than a standard artist. And that's because of all the meetings that might happen within the production. Especially when you have to work with edits like animatic editors, that's a whole time sink of its own. The next sucky thing about being a leadership is sometimes your ass is on the line due to your responsibilities. But in some cases, it depends on the production. I remember being in one production where it was for a TV show, and if an episode wasn't turning out the way it should be for, let's say, animatics, sometimes the director will get all the blame for it. And, that director ends up leaving or getting let go. And then you're going to have to find a new director that has to lead a team and adjust to that team. Now, when I was a supervisor, I was constantly hounded of things like, where is this material? When are these materials coming in? Even though that wasn't really my job to track production work, I'm oftentimes responsible for the outcomes of my department. I kind of understand now when directors say they have this curse because they kind of have to prove themselves to, let's say, the client, a higher up, or a supervisor that's higher than them. And then having to delegate with others underneath them. It's tough. And I totally understand that paranoia and anxiety. The next one I want to talk about is you're going to have to be decisive and call the shots. Now, if you're a creative person that wants to put your fingerprint or your signature in the works that you do supervise, it might be cool. But in some cases, you're kind of forced to make decisions where you haven't really had the time or the experience to even think about it or the knowledge to even move forward with it. And sometimes you might make a decision that might lead the team astray. You might be making a decision that will cause them way more work that doesn't really fix the solution. And then that's a whole waste of resources. And while you are making decisions, calling the shots, and sort of using your own skills to make creative solutions, at other times, a higher up, your client or your supervising director will tell you to make these changes that you probably don't agree with, but you still have to. And then you have to delegate those changes to the people beneath you or the people that you work with. It's a mix of you're calling the shots even if you don't know the choices that you make are the right ones, and then having to, let's say, address notes from above and then having to adjust your solutions to adjust those notes with the people that you work with. And in some cases, it no longer feels like choices that you made anymore. I can't imagine having to be a supervisor where you have a voice and you put all these efforts on making the shots, but then you're forced to make new notes or new shots based on notes that you got from higher up that does not feel like you anymore, but you're listed as the director of this project, even if the choices that you made are not ones you necessarily agree with. So while I do think that experiencing the leadership role is good for your career, good for overall experience, and it gives you a lot more perspective on things, I can also say that it made me appreciate just working under someone else and just being focused on my own job, being a hired gun. And if I wanted to be a commander or a director, I have my own personal work to do that with. I get to exercise that without having to deal with the crappy stuff that comes with a leadership role. I can just focus on my own work without having to worry about the burdens that was bestowed on someone else. Like, for example, knowing things that are quite burdening. It's the director's business, but it's not my business at all. I personally don't have to worry about it. I can just focus on my work, which in return I can add in my portfolio. And when I finish work for the day, I can just fuck off. I think another reason why I wanted to make this video was when I was younger, I really wanted to be a leader. I really wanted to be a director. For a lot of different reasons. Now that I've experienced it, I can also say, even though it's a big step in my career where I exercise things beyond what I'm capable of, wow, it's also quite a burden too. I think if it's something that you've always ever been interested in, it's worth experiencing it if you can. And you might also realize it's not for everyone. It might not be for you. It might not be for me. It could be a production or project-based thing. The experience can differ. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.